meet. Secretary Greene, Associate Director Polster, Mr. Goddard, members of the HCD. My name is Jim Greene. I'm the Director of the Emergency Shelter Commission for the City of Boston, Public Health Service Center of the Boston Public Health Commission. Testifying to provide feedback to improve the emergency regulations affecting eligibility for emergency assistance for homeless families enacted in recent months. In Boston, as you may know, families who have no resources, in addition to the wide array of organizations that have previously testified, turn to the Mayor's 24-hour constituent hotline and the Emergency Shelter Commission for assistance. And in fact, the hotline passes calls through to us in the daytime. We're also on call lists being given out by DHCD homeless eligibility offices across the state and by many other agencies. Of the many examples I could give to underscore the seriousness of rethinking and recalibrating regulations, you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to give any of those examples because there's very little that I could say that would add to the eloquence or, quite frankly, the anguish of the families that have already testified of their own first-hand experience. So I'd like to give you a sense of scale and of our concern. Since the new regulations were enacted, we've received over 500 calls each month in August and September, a 43% increase over our average of 350 calls per month earlier in the year. All of the increases related to families denied shelter placement since the new regs were enacted in August. This has included calls from or about some 350 families, approximately 220 of whom, and possibly more, it's been quite a whirlwind, were denied shelter. It is not only the number, but the nature of these calls that has been of great concern. You've heard from hospital, emergency, and pediatric departments, domestic violence specialists, community health centers. We also heard from the Boston Public Schools. They've all called seeking assistance for families denied shelter, and families have reported sleeping in cars, parks, at the airport, or approaching police stations in seeking assistance. These kinds of calls, particularly people in cars and parks, were extremely rare for families prior to August. We do our best to triage and refer families, but we do not have adequate resources to provide an alternative safety net for such a high volume of families. Faced with these many challenges, I would like to highlight a few areas that would mitigate some of the situations of greatest risk. Specifically, I ask you to consider the following: to provide a more adequate level of assessment and triage for families at the front door, with particular and extra care taken for families that assert that they will have nowhere to go upon leaving the office, and those reporting unsafe situations. I'd like to add as an aside that I hope, upon taking a step back from this hearing, that the critical work of the department, as imperfect as shelter and motels may be, and no substitute for permanent housing, has for many years prevented the magnitude of the kind of risk situations of risk that you've been hearing about from occurring, and that the workers, the SEIU workers and your line staff should know that they have been preventing these things from happening. Amending the regulations restricting eligibility to households staying in places not meant for human habitation to allow families at imminent risk to be placed presumptively. And finally, because state and city health departments work together with a shared goal of reducing disparities in